This is Tristan from Clonehead Cards, and welcome to a 3-player game of Commander featuring Ronny playing his Sigarda, host of Herons deck, Chris playing his Jhoira of the Ghitu deck, and Kyle playing his Karona False God deck. Chris wins the die roll and keeps an opening hand of Snow-Covered Island, It That Betrays, Time Crafting, Desolate Lighthouse, Niv Mizzet Draco Genius, Sulphur Falls, and Darksteel Colossus. Ronny goes next and keeps in the opening hand of Argothian Enchantress, Journey to Nowhere, Birds of Paradise, Aven Mind Sensor, Ancient Tomb, Verdant Catacombs, and Wooded Bastion. Kyle goes next and keeps in the opening hand of Forest, Island, Blood Crypt, Kodama's Reach, Chromatic Lantern, Gruul Charm, and Ristic Study. Chris starts things off drawing Karn Liberated, then playing the Snow-Covered Island for the turn. He then passes. Ronny draws a Forest, then plays a Verdant Catacombs. He then immediately sacrifices it, paying 1 life to search his library for Savannah, and then puts it onto the battlefield. He then taps the Savannah to play a Birds of Paradise. He then passes. Kyle draws a Sylvan Primordial, and then puts a Blood Crypt onto the battlefield tapped. He passes. Chris draws an Arcanus the Omnipotent, and then plays a Sulphur Falls as his land for the turn. He then passes. Ronny untaps and draws Dueling Grounds for the turn. He then plays a Wooded Bastion, keeping the Aven Mind Sensor in hand. He passes the turn. Kyle draws a Bane Restraint, then plays a Forest, passing the turn. Chris draws and plays a Shivan Reef from his hand. He then taps out to cast his commander. He passes the turn, but then at the end of his turn, Ronny flashes in the Aven Mind Sensor. Ronny then untaps for his turn, drawing a Battle Mastery, then plays a Forest as his land for the turn. He then taps 2 to cast Argothian Enchantress, and then to Chris's dismay, he taps another 2 mana to cast a Journey to Nowhere, targeting Chris's commander, exiling it. Ronny then draws an Oblivion Ring, thanks to the Argothian Enchantress ability. Declining to attack, Ronny passes the turn. Kyle draws a Mirari's Wake, then plays an island for the turn. Staring down the Aven Mind Sensor, Kyle decides to play the Chromatic Lantern over the Kodama's Reach, passing the turn. Chris draws a Time Stop, and then plays a Desolate Lighthouse as his land for the turn, unable to suspend anything, having lost his general. He passes the turn. Ronny untaps and draws a Mirari's Wake. He then plays an Ancient Tomb and taps it, taking 2 damage to cast the Mirari's Wake. He draws a Crop Rotation due to the Argothian Enchantress, and then passes the turn. Kyle draws a Flagstones, plays it, and then taps 5 to cast a Mirari's Wake of his own. He passes the turn. But at the end of his turn, Chris activates his Desolate Lighthouse, and in response, Ronny sacrifices a Forest to Crop Rotation in order to search up a cabinet, putting it onto the battlefield, and naming Angel. Chris draws and discards due to the Desolate Lighthouse. Chris untaps for his turn, drawing Ulamog, and plays a 5th land. He's then able to recast his general. He passes the turn. Ronny untaps, draws an Unquestioned Authority, and immediately goes to play his commander, Sigarda, who is uncounterable. He then taps the Ancient Tomb again, taking 2 damage to cast Oblivion Ring to once again exile Chris's commander, then draws due to the Argothian Enchantress. He then plays his land for the turn. He then goes to his attack phase to attack Kyle with his Aven Mind Sensor and his Argothian Enchantress for 4 damage. He then passes the turn. Kyle untaps and draws Rider Replication. He then taps 7 mana to cast Sylvan Primordial, blowing up Ronny's Mirari's Wake and Chris's Desolate Lighthouse, but thanks to the Aven Mind Sensor, is only able to search the top 4 cards of his library. He looks at the top 4 and reveals nothing. He then shuffles his library, essentially neutering the Sylvan Primordial. He then passes the turn. Chris untaps, draws and plays a Snow-Covered Mountain, looks at Ronny's board with a Time Stop in hand, but has no way to play it, having lost his 6 mana due to the Sylvan Primordial. He passes the turn. Ronny untaps, draws a Wasteland, and then plays it. He then floats 6 mana, taking another 2 off the Ancient Tomb, and plays an Unquestioned Authority, targeting his Sigarda. He then draws 2 cards, one from the Unquestioned Authority and one from the Argothian Enchantress. He then casts Battle Mastery, also targeting Sigarda, drawing another card off the Enchantress. He then goes to combat, attacking Kyle for 10 damage with his commander, and due to the Unquestioned Authority, Kyle has no way of blocking it. He takes 10 commander damage. Kyle then untaps and draws Urban Evolution. Having cards in hand, but no way of dealing with Sigarda, Kyle decides to cast Urban Evolution to try to find an answer to Ronny's Sigarda. He draws 3 cards in the form of Armageddon, Golgari Charm, and Vow of Lightning. Missing his first and second land drop for the turn, Kyle decides to play a Collective Restraint in an attempt to stave off further attacks from Sigarda. Chris draws and plays a Snow-Covered Island, then taps 6 mana to cast Karn to exile Ronny's Battle Mastery, but then is reminded that Karn actually costs 7 mana, and plays Niv Mizzet Draco Genius instead. He passes the turn. Noticing Kyle's board state at the end of Chris's turn, Ronny decides to wasteland Kyle's Blood Crypt in order to put him off basic land types for the Collective Restraint. Ronny untaps, draws Exploration, and then casts Armadillo Cloak on his Sigarda in order to make him strong enough to take Kyle out of the game with general damage. He then goes to combat, swinging 14 and having to pay 2 mana for Kyle's Collective Restraint. He then gains 14 life and then draws Sun Titan due to the Argothian Enchantress. Post-combat, he plays an Exploration, drawing a Command Tower. He then plays the Command Tower, thinks for a moment, and then Swords of Plowshare Chris's 1 creature, which is enough to make Chris scoop, winning Ronny the game.